Welcome to the America We Forget. Today we uncover 10 cheap 1930s dishes our Black American ancestors ate to survive. From neckbones and rice to dried pinto beans, these meals tell stories of resilience, creativity, and survival during the hardest times. Number 1. Neckbones and rice. In the 1930s, neckbones and rice were more than a meal. They were survival ingenuity on a plate. Families often bought pork neckbones because they were cheap, overlooked cuts. Yet when simmered for hours, they released a deep, smoky richness that flavored every grain of rice. Seniors recall how the pot would bubble slowly, filling the kitchen with an aroma that promised comfort despite hardship. The meat clung stubbornly to the bone, and children learned patience, picking carefully to savor every bite. This dish carried pride, proof that even scraps could be transformed into something hearty, nourishing, and memorable. It wasn't just food, it was resilience, a reminder that creativity and endurance kept families fed when times were lean. Number 2. Dandelion green salad. In the 1930s, dandelion greens weren't weeds, they were survival food. Families gathered them fresh from yards and fields, washing away the grit before tossing them with vinegar, salt, or a splash of bacon drippings. Seniors recall how the bitter bite of the greens was softened by whatever seasoning could be spared, turning something free into a dish that carried both nutrition and pride. Children learned early that resilience meant seeing value where others saw nothing. This salad wasn't fancy, but it was a lifeline, a reminder that ingenuity and resourcefulness could transform the overlooked into nourishment. Elders often said, "Those greens kept us strong when the cupboard was bare," because it wasn't just a salad, it was memory tied to survival, creativity, and the will to endure. Number 3. Sweet potato pie without sugar. During the Depression, sweet potato pie was stripped down to its bare essentials. Families couldn't afford sugar, so they leaned on the natural sweetness of the potato itself. Seniors recall how the pies were mashed smooth, spiced with cinnamon or nutmeg, if those were on hand, and baked until the edges browned and the aroma filled the kitchen. The flavor was earthy, subtle, and comforting, not the dessert we know today, but a reminder that ingenuity could still bring joy to the table. Children learned that sweetness didn't always come from sugar, but from patience and tradition. Elders often said that pie tasted of survival because it wasn't just dessert, it was memory, tied to scarcity, creativity, and the determination to make something special out of almost nothing. Number 4. Pig feet and collard greens. In the 1930s, pig feet and collard greens were the definition of making do with what you had. Families bought pig feet because they were cheap, tough cuts, but when simmered long with vinegar, onions, and spices, they softened into tender bites full of flavor. Collard greens, often grown in backyard gardens, soaked up the salty broth, turning into a rich, soulful side that stretched the meal further. Seniors recall how the pot would bubble for hours, filling the house with a smell that promised both nourishment and comfort. The dish was more than food. It was a symbol of resilience, of turning scraps and garden greens into something hearty enough to feed a family. Elders often said, "That pot kept us strong," because it carried memory, survival, and the pride of transforming hardship into tradition. Number 5. Pone bread rose. Pone bread rose was the Depression-era staple that turned cornmeal into comfort. Families mixed cornmeal with water, salt, and sometimes a splash of buttermilk, then baked it in heavy iron skillets until it lifted just enough to form a golden crust. Elders remember how its dense, hearty texture filled stomachs when little else was available, and how children would sop up gravy or molasses with each slice. The rose gave it a touch of pride, a bread that rose slightly, symbolizing hope even in scarcity. It wasn't fancy, but it was dependable, carrying warmth to the table and proving that even the simplest ingredients could be transformed into nourishment and memory. Number 6. Fried fish heads. Fried fish heads carried both thrift and flavor to the table. When whole fish were bought or caught, nothing was wasted. The heads were cleaned, seasoned, and dropped into hot grease until the skin crisped and the cheeks turned tender. Elders recall how the crunch gave way to rich, delicate meat hidden in the jaw and behind the eyes, a taste that felt like a reward for patience. Children often learn from their parents where to find the best bites, turning the meal into a lesson in resourcefulness. The dish wasn't just about eating scraps, it was about honoring the catch, stretching food as far as it could go, and finding joy in flavors others overlooked. Fried fish heads became a symbol of ingenuity, proving that even the humblest parts of the animal could be transformed into something memorable. Number 7. Okra Soup. Okra soup was a bowl of comfort that carried both garden freshness and ingenuity. Families simmered okra with tomatoes, onions, and whatever scraps of meat or bones they could spare, letting the pods release their silky texture to thicken the broth naturally. Elders recall how the soup bubbled gently, filling the air with a tangy, earthy aroma that promised nourishment even when cupboards were bare. Children learned to love the slippery bite of okra, dipping bread or pone into the pot to stretch the meal further. This dish wasn't just about flavor, it was about resilience, transforming simple vegetables into a hearty stew that warmed bodies and spirits alike. Okra soup became a symbol of survival, proof that creativity in the kitchen could turn scarcity into comfort. Number 8. Pan-fried corn was the quick skillet magic of Depression kitchens. Families shaved kernels straight off the cob, tossed them into hot grease or butter, and let them sizzle until golden and slightly crisp. Elders recall the popping sound in the pan, the smell of corn caramelizing, and the way it turned into a side dish that felt like a treat even when money was scarce. Sometimes a splash of milk or a pinch of salt was added, but most often it was just corn and heat. Simple, fast, and filling. Children loved scraping the browned bits from the skillet, calling them the sweet crunch. This dish carried joy in its simplicity, proof that even the humblest harvest could be transformed into something memorable, warm, and worth gathering around the table for. Number 9. Cowpea and collard stew. Cowpea and collard stew was a powerhouse of survival, combining two ingredients that were cheap, filling, and packed with nutrition. Cowpeas, often called black-eyed peas, simmered slowly until tender, releasing a nutty flavor that blended perfectly with the earthy bite of collard greens. Elders recall how the pot would bubble all afternoon, seasoned with bits of salt pork or whatever scraps were available, creating a broth that was both hearty and soulful. Children learned to scoop it with pone bread or rice, stretching the meal even further. This stew wasn't just sustenance, it was a symbol of endurance, showing how beans and greens together could keep families strong through lean times. It carried memory, pride, and the quiet ingenuity of turning simple harvests into lasting nourishment. Number 10. Dried pinto beans. Dried pinto beans were the quiet hero of Depression-era kitchens. Bought in bulk for pennies, they could sit on the shelf for months and still deliver a filling meal when soaked and simmered. Families often cooked them with onions, bits of salt pork, or whatever scraps were available, letting the beans swell into tender bites that carried smoky, earthy flavor. Elders recall how the pot of beans could feed a household for days, stretched with rice, bread, or collard greens. Children learned patience, waiting as the beans softened slowly, and joy when the first spoonful warmed their bellies. Pinto beans weren't glamorous, but they were dependable, a symbol of thrift, endurance, and the ingenuity that kept families strong through the hardest years. And that closes our journey through 10 cheap 1930s dishes our Black American ancestors ate to survive. These weren't just meals, they were stories of resilience, creativity, and pride. Subscribe to The America We Forget to keep these legacies alive.